All right, so this is the sign-in link. I'm gonna send in chat one more time. So today we are going to be talking about how to set up a Syncthing server. I talked about Syncthing on Tuesday, so now we are actually going to put it on a server and make it act as a central location in your local network where you can actually sync files. So today we are going to be going over virtual machines again, just have a little review of what it is and why it's important to understand virtual networks in this case. Next, we're going to go over SSH. This is a big topic and it's very important. We're going to be covering how to create a key pair for SSH. We're going to talk about what the key pair consists of. We are going to be talking about this directory right here called .ssh. We are going to also be learning how to send a public key over to our server. We are going to learn how to actually SSH, and lastly, we're going to edit this config file. After that, I'm going to show you about Syncthing. We're going to review Syncthing a little bit again. We're going to actually install Syncthing, and I'm going to go over a few settings that you should be aware of. And lastly, we are going to learn something called SSH tunneling to make the server work. Lastly, we're going to be covering firewalls. I'm going to be using something called uncomplicated firewall, UFW. So I'm going to explain what that is, and we're going to set up some rules to secure our server. So just as a review, what is a server? A server is just a computer providing another computer a service. The cloud is just high demand, high availability of computing resources. So things like Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, they have a lot of different services that they offer, and it's all in the cloud, so the users don't have any, they don't have to do anything, it just works. And lastly, we have Syncthing. So Syncthing is just software you install on a computer, and then any computer that you want to have file synchronization, you also install it on that computer, and you create a peer-to-peer network to sync files to each other. So this means you don't touch the cloud. With Syncthing, you kind of create your own cloud in a way. It syncs files straight to the device. There's no public servers that it touches. So like I said, before we get started, I just wanted to go over VMs one more time and kind of go over SSH more in depth, because that is something that's important outside of this workshop, and it's I just wanted to cover all my bases before we get to SSH tunneling. So we are going to go over virtual machines now. What is a virtual machine? It is basically a simulated environment, which is just like an operating system within your own computer. So if you guys are not familiar, you just create a VM onto your computer, and it uses the storage on your computer to create another operating system that you can use. A hypervisor is just software that works with your computer's resource pool to manage VMs, and what resource pool means is the hardware. So things like the storage capability, your memory, and CPU. So for hypervisors, there are two types of hypervisor. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is usually called bare metal hypervisor, which means the only purpose of this computer is to just run the hypervisor. Type 2 though is different, because there is a operating system on top of the hypervisor is on top of the operating system. So what I mean by this is this image right here. So for type 1, where you have Proxmox or ESXi, you have the hardware and the hypervisor sits right on top of it. So they have full access to this resource pool, and you create VMs that way. For type 2 though, there is one thing in the middle of the hardware and hypervisor, and it's our OS. So if you're using VMware or VirtualBox, it's the hypervisor is right here, and your Windows is the bottom layer. So it's different because the hardware, the resource pool, the OS uses it first, and whatever's left after the host OS gets provisioned to the hypervisor. They both work the same way. They both deploy VMs. You can still use the VMs the same way, but it's two different use cases. You typically see type 1s in a enterprise level environment, and like for home use, that's where you see type 2s. So this is actually what a type 1 looks like. If you haven't seen it already, when you first install it, you only see a black screen on the device, and it gives you this IP address. On port 8006, this is where Proxmox will run. So if you type this on a web browser, this will pop up, and this is how you're going to use a type 1 hypervisor. We won't be going into type 1 hypervisors today. I'm going to use VMware, but if you do end up trying out type 1 hypervisors like Proxmox or ESXi, I highly encourage you to do that. It's pretty interesting, but you need separate infrastructure for that. So if you have a spare PC laying around, I encourage you to use that PC and install a type 1 hypervisor on it. So the next thing I want to talk about is called virtual networks. So when you're working with VMs, there are typically three main network configurations that you're going to see. The first is bridged, the second is NAT, and the third is host only. So for bridged, the VM acts as if it is on your home network. The NAT, it gets masked, so it's behind your OS, but it gets its own network. Host only works similarly to NAT, where it gets its own network. So, but the difference is that it's isolated. So for host only, there's no internet access. So this is a diagram that I drew of all three networks. So for host only, as you can see here, it has a different IP address. It's on the .100, and we are on the .0 IP block. So it's similar to NAT, but again, there's no internet access when you use host only. For NAT, we are on a .10 IP block, whereas on our home network, we're still on .0. So this is typically what you're gonna work with when you're using VMs. You want to have some sort of like segmentation when you work with VMs, because it is a test environment, so you don't really want these machines on the same network as the rest of your local area network unless you know what you're doing, and that is what bridged is. So if you look at the IP address for bridge, they're both on the .0 network. So it's 0.50, 51, 52, and this is 53, 54, 55. So even though it's a VM, it's actually running on your network. Three different use cases. So definitely pay attention to that when we are going to be working on the server today. I'm going to put it on the NAT network, but Syncthing, this workshop, you can definitely put it on the bridge network. That is what I'm going to do after this workshop, because I actually want to use this file server for my home use. So we are going to be going over SSH next. So what is SSH? It stands for Secure Shell, and it's a secure way to remote into another computer. It works over port 22, and it replaces the old protocol called Telnet, because SSH is encrypted. If you use Telnet, it's open connection. Anyone can see what you're doing. SSH fixes that problem by having an encrypted connection, so nobody can see what you're doing. SSH is also interesting because it has other protocols. It's like a subset of protocols called SCP, called Secure Copy, SFTP, which is Secure File Transfer Protocol. That is a bit out of our scope today, so I will not be covering that, but those are very useful. And SSH is, again, a pretty important topic, pretty important concept to learn about outside of this workshop. You're going to be using SSH if you know, in cybersecurity. So definitely, if anything you can take out of this workshop, you learned SSH. So the first thing we're going to go over is creating an SSH key pair. So this is the command right here. It's ssh-keygen tact and then the key. What tact is it's called a flag. And what a flag is that it gives a command more functionality. So depending on what flags you give a command, it gives it more use cases. So in our case, the tact flag indicates what kind of key I want to create. So if you type in tact ed25519, you create this type of key. And when you create it, it's in this directory. I mentioned this earlier, the .ssh. If you notice, it has a dot in front of it. All it means is that it's actually hidden. So I'm going to be showing this to you real soon. Don't worry, Ferris. I was going to go into the to our VMs right after this. For this one, you type it into our Linux box. Yeah. So let's just get right into it then. So I'm going to be going over here. I'm going to open our terminal. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to type in that same command, ssh-keygen tact, yeah, ed25519. And if you didn't know already, I just tab completed. So terminal's kind of smart. So if you kind of have a unique text, it just autofills it for you. So ssh-keygen tact ed25519. So this is the default directory for our SSH keys. I'm going to rename mine. So I'm going to retype that whole directory, home/rob/.ssh/ I'm going to call my keys Syncthing. So click enter. So for keys, they prompt you to enter a passphrase. It's entirely optional for a passphrase. If you don't want to do it, you can just click enter and it will just skip it. But you know, for more security, I do encourage everyone to, to type in a passphrase for the SSH keys. Just in case it does get snatched, you increase the chances of it not being used since they probably don't know the passphrase. So I'm going to type in the passphrase now. All right, so if you see this right here, it means the key has been created. You can see right here, your public key has been saved to /home rob ssh syncthing.pub. So let's go to that right now. So I'm gonna go cd ~/.ssh, and what the tilde does is that it replaces home/rob. So you don't have to type in home/rob every time. If you type in the tilde, it kind of skips all that, so it saves you time. So I'm going to switch into this. Oh wait, let me show you something actually. So if we go back, we're in our home directory right now. If we type in ls, these are the files that we can see. There is no .ssh. But if you type in ls tac la, you can see it. And what the L flag does is that it lists out the directories in a list format. I like it like that because it's easier to see and kind of locate files quicker. So if we type in ls tac la, we see the .ssh folder right here. So I'm going to switch into that directory. So if I type in ls, we see Syncthing and Syncthing.pub. All right. Does anyone have any questions there so far about creating the key pair? All right, I'm going to continue on. So our SSH keys are in this directory .ssh. The dot means it's hidden. You use this command to show it. So this is a very, very important. The command SSH keygen created 2 keys. This is called asymmetric encryption because it uses 2 keys to encrypt and decrypt something. The public key is what encrypts something, and the private is what decrypts something. One thing to note here, do not share your private key with anyone. You are literally giving them the keys to your kingdom if they do snatch it. So we are not, don't send your private keys to anyone. And to kind of show you what I'm talking about, can everybody see Paint? I shared my screen, but just want to confirm. Cool. All right. So this is the analogy that I learned SSH from the great Dr. Shen himself. So we have our server right here, right? I'm gonna name it server. And our 2 boxes today, I have Windows 10. Just gonna name it Win 10. And we also have, Ubuntu desktop. So our SSH keygen command creates 2 keys. So in our analogy, the private key is an actual key. The public key, though, you can think of it as a lock. Here, boom. So whether you do it on Windows 10 or Ubuntu, you generate 2 keys. And what we're going to be doing very soon is that we're going to be sending our public key to the server. So when you send it, the public key gets put onto this server. And what it does now is that it acts like a door. So think of the public key as a locked door now. The public key kind of, it acts like a door, and the private key is the only key that can unlock this. So if you were to SSH into here, you would hit this door and it would say, do you have the key? And if you do have the accompanying private key, you get to SSH in. That's why they come in a pair. Only the public key and private key of Ubuntu can like kind of unlock each other, and same goes with Windows 10. So if you create a key pair right here, they can only encrypt and decrypt each other. It's you can't use the public key of Windows 10 and the private key of Ubuntu. It doesn't work like that. It comes in a pair, and that's how they kind of work. The public key is a door, and the only way you can get in is through that other private key that unlocks, which allows you to SSH into the server. Is anyone kind of confused about the analogy? I can try to explain it a little bit better, but that's how I learned SSH, and it made way more sense to me, because when I first learned it, I was like, what is a key? What is SSH? All that. Alrighty. I'm gonna go back to my slides now. So now we know what SSH keys are and how they work. So the reason why I wanted everyone here to use ED2559 255.19 this is actually what your key looks like. The other key you had an option to make was RSA, but ED255.19 has a more, it's like a stronger encryption method or algorithm or something like that. I'm not too familiar with cryptography, but what it means in our analogy is it has more of these thingies. I don't know what they're called for keys, but you have more of these lines, which means it's harder for you to kind of crack. So the next command we're going to learn is called SSH copy ID. And what that does is that it will transfer our public key to the server. So we did SSH keygen to create the keys on our host machine. Now we're going to transfer it to our server so that we can SSH in. And the command to do that is called SSH-copy-ID. And we're using a flag again. This time we're using tag I. And what this I flag does is that it identifies the path to the key that you're using. So let's just say we had more than one key. That's where the I would be used in this case, because if you have more than one key, you have to specify what kind of key you're using to send over to the other device. And our second input is just the user at the IP that you want to send it to. So this would be the remote user on our server, and this would be the remote IP of the server. So with that, let's try it out. We have our Ubuntu machine again. So we're going to do SSH copy ID tag I. We're going to use that same default directory, and we're going to do Syncthing. Remember, when you type in this command, it has to have .pub. Okay, that shows you that it's the public key. If you do it like this, you're sending the server your private key. Don't do that. So we're going to copy that public key to this IP address. Oh, so if you don't know the server IP, you would type in IPA, which is short for IP adder. So IPA tells me that is 192.168.10.4. So I will type in the same IP here, 68.10.4. Oh, I forgot one thing. If you don't have SSH installed already, you do sudo apt install SSH. That is why I couldn't send over the keys, because our server doesn't even have SSH installed. So you would just click yes here. Yeah, so if you see this error, port 22 connection refused, kind of troubleshoot. By default, it doesn't come with SSH unless you say I want the SSH server on the Ubuntu server installation. So all you have to do is just install it. So with that, let's run the same command one more time. And here we go. So it's going to ask you, do you want a fingerprint? You type in yes, and all that is that it identifies this machine. So we type in yes. So now we're going to enter the password of our server, and we are in. So let me go back to our slide to quickly show you something. The next thing we are going to do is actually SSH into the server. So how you do that is you type in SSH, the remote user at the remote IP address. One thing to note here, I've ran into this issue a few times. If this command doesn't work, you use the tag I flag that we used earlier, which identifies what key you want to use for SSH. So it would look like SSH tag I, the private key, at the remote user at remote IP address. And the reason why that is because if you have more than one key, I believe you have to identify what you want to SSH with, because with one key right now, I think Ubuntu kind of knows that it's going to use that key to SSH into. So just keep that in mind. So with that being said, let's type it in here. Oh, right here. It has the whole thing for you right here. So we type in SSH. Hold on, can't see. All right, Rob at 192.168.10.4. So this prompt right here is asking for the passphrase for our key pair. See, the private key, but it's locked. So we just type that in, and we are in. And we can tell we're in because we're on 192.168.10.5. And if we just show our IP real quick, we are on the .5, and this is on the .4 now. And you can kind of tell here, you know, if you name it, it's Syncthing server. So we just completed SSHing into our remote server. The next thing we're going to do is edit the SSH config file. So this is the directory where our config file is in /etc/ssh/sshd_config. But before we do that, I just wanted to do one thing. I'm going to do the same thing on our Windows box. So I've downloaded MobileXterm as our tool to SSH into it. I recommend you guys install this. PuTTY is old, ugly, you know, it was made before the Civil War. I don't think anybody uses it now. So we're going to use MobileXterm. So we're going to go to, where is it? Tools. All right. It's called Mobile Key Gen. So we're going to click it. We're going to specify we want ED25519, and we click generate. So it generates the key for us. What we want to do is we want to copy this. So, you know, make sure you copy it, and we're going to save it. It shows us this weird directory. I'm going to put it in our users directory. So you would click local disk users, and the user's called Rob. But since we've never made any SSH keys, we're going to have to make the folder as well. So we're going to type in .ssh right here. We're going to go into it, and we're going to call this also Syncthing. So we're going to create that key pair, and we're also going to create the private key. Oh, I forgot. Well, it's optional, but you know, type in a passphrase if you want to, and we're going to save it in the same directory. Syncthing. All right. So with that, we are going to close this, and I'm going to show you something. So we're on our server now. Let's SSH into that same .ssh directory that we were on our Ubuntu desktop. So if we type in ls right here, we have a file called authorized keys. So let's use this command called cat to show us the output of it. Cat. So this right here is the public key that I just sent to the server on our Ubuntu desktop. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit it using nano, and it's a text editor. So we're going to do sudo nano authorized keys. And the reason why we're editing it on here is that we are going to have to add our Windows public key to the server. And you could do it here, but there is no copy paste capabilities when you're actually working within the server here. So since I'm already on an SSH session on my server, all I have to do is just click paste, and it pastes our Windows key right here. So to save it, we click Control X, and it says Save Modified Buffer. I'm going to put Y for yes, and Enter to save it. So Control X, Y, Enter. So with that being saved, we are going to go to this directory now. Whoops, this directory, etc/ssh/sshd_config. So we're going to do cd to change directories. We're going to do etc ssh. I'm going to stop here because I want to show you something. So we type in ls, we see the sshd_config right here. What you want to do before editing this is make a backup. So we make a backup with this command called cp sshd_. Oh, I'm autofill it. So what the cp command does is that it'll copy this file. So you specify copy with this command, the file you want to copy, and the next input is what the new file you want to copy into is. So we're going to name this sshd_config.bak, which is just a backup. Oh, I need sudo permissions. So if you type in sudo and 2 exclamation marks, it will run the same command again as a sudo user. So you don't have to type in the whole command and type with sudo. So sudo 2 exclamation points. And if we check, we have created a backup file. And the reason why that is because we're going to be editing this. So you want a default configuration just for a backup. So we're going to use the same text editor, sudo nano sshd config. So before I get to editing this, I wanted to show you a few things. The reason why we're editing this is because we are, 1, disabling password authentication. We are enabling public key authentication. We are disabling root login, and we are limiting the amount of times that a wrong password can be entered. So if you entered, the default is like 6. That's why we're going to lower it. There's, if you know your password, you can't get it wrong 6 times. So we're going to lower it. And the reason why we're going to disable password authentication is that we've already set up SSH keys to our server for whoever wants to log into our server. So we have one on our Ubuntu desktop and one on our Windows desktop. So with those 2 devices, we have all the hosts that are going to be SSHing into our server. So what you want to do, if we go back to my analogy, is we currently have 2 doors. One is for Windows to SSH in, and one is for Ubuntu to SSH in. With password authentication, it kind of has a third door in a way, because let's just say we had some random computer right here. If they don't have the keys to SSH into our server, what you can do is you can just enter the password and you're also in. We don't want that. We set up public key authentication, so those who have keys can authenticate to the server. That way, anyone without a door, anyone without their distinct door, will not be able to SSH into our server, and that increases the security of our server. So with that, we are in the configuration file of SSH. So you can think of this as a settings, our settings. So the first thing we want to do is actually right here. So as you can see throughout the file, it has a bunch of hashtags, and what the hashtags mean is that this is the default configuration. So if you want to edit the default configuration and change it to something else, you would have to delete the hashtag and edit it. So for permit root login, we're going to put no. And the reason why that is because we do not want anyone to have a remote connection as a root user. So right here is the max authentication tries. Oh shoot. There's no way, you're gonna type your password wrong 6 times. We're gonna lower it to 3. So the next one is actually right here. We see pub key authentication, yes. So what that means is our default settings, it already allows public key authentication to be enabled by default, so we don't have to change it. But the last one we're gonna have to change is for password authentication. So it is right here. We're gonna delete this hashtag. Now we're gonna put no. With that being done, we do Control X, save the modified buffer, and we click Enter to save it. So with that, I believe we can test it out. SSH 12.12.168.10.4. 4, yeah, 4. And since we have the public key, we're in. So I'm going to show you what I mean by public key authentication versus password authentication. So I'm going to open a new tab on mobile xterm, and I'm going to run the same command, right? 192.168.10.4. What did it? Oh, I forgot one thing. After you edit the file, you're gonna have to run this command: sudo systemctl restart sshd, and that just refreshes the SSH service. So go to Windows, run the same command. You are gonna be denied, and that goes back to this picture. Only these two devices can SSH in because they have their respective doors. So if you don't have a public key that is sent to the server using the SSH copy ID command, you can't SSH in. And we want it that way to increase the security of our server because, it's running a service now. So we have to be careful. So that is it for SSH. That was, a bit long. Does anyone have any questions for SSH? Because this is it's a pretty important concept to understand, and I just want to answer any questions if anyone had one. I don't want anyone to be, lost for the rest of our workshop because SSH is important. All right. No one has any questions. We are going to move over to Syncthing. So just to recap, Syncthing is software that you install on computers, and what Syncthing does is that it will connect to a computer. So we have Syncthing installed on PC1 and PC2, and you connect the two. You establish a peer-to-peer network so you can have file synchronization. And this is a cool, technology because you don't have to use the cloud no more. Syncthing syncs files across devices locally, so you don't touch any cloud services, any public servers. So that means, increased privacy, and you don't have to, worry about more sensitive data on a public cloud. These public clouds have a lot of terms and conditions with their services that, none of us read. So I wanted to show you guys Syncthing, which is a cool alternative, free open source file synchronization software. Can you still easily share files via link or so? What do you mean by link? Like a website link, Ferris? Oh, so that is the thing with Syncthing. It really out of the box only works locally. So if you would want to share a picture with someone, you would have to kind of go out of your way to like make Syncthing work outside of your local network, which is using like something like a VPN. So, you know, Syncthing does come with its cons. So for things like pictures that you want to share, I definitely recommend to just stay with Google Drive for that, because it's sort of hard to put Syncthing outside of your local area network. But yeah, you can definitely use both. Yeah, no problem. So the first thing we're going to do is install Syncthing on both Windows and Linux. So for Windows, it's, you know, super easy. You go to this website and you click download. For Linux, it's the same thing, but you install it via the terminal. So let's get started. We are going to do it on Windows first. So if we go to Windows, type in Syncthing. We're going to click this downloads. So for Windows, there's like different installation methods. You can download the base Syncthing, which is what we're going to be doing on Linux. But for Windows, I just recommend Synctracer. It's its own application for Syncthing. And the reason why that is because it's easier to manage Syncthing on Windows with this GUI application, because it's kind of, you gotta go out of your way a little to make the service auto start if you install the base package. Let's see, did I download it? Oops. Oh, okay. Just type in yes. Next. Yeah, let's create a desktop shortcut. So while that's loading, we're gonna do this on Linux as well. You don't have to install any file on Linux. Linux has its own repository, which you can think of as a Play Store. So in our Play Store, we tell our terminal apt, our package manager, hey, I want to install Syncthing. So with that, you click enter and you install the app Syncthing. It's called a package in Linux, but you can think of it as an app. So we do have that installed on our Ubuntu box. Let me check something. All right, Windows is also done. So yeah, that is how you install Syncthing. We are gonna allow. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add a user called Syncthing on our, oh, I forgot one thing. I forgot to install it on our server. So we're gonna do the same thing, sudo apt install Syncthing on our server. If you don't have Syncthing on our server, this whole thing doesn't work. Huh? Oh, I already installed it. Okay, cool. Oh, that's weird. All right, so we have Syncthing on our server now. So this prompt shows allow anonymous usage reporting. No. So by default, this web GUI, well, actually here, I'll show you. This is how Syncthing works. Let me run Syncthing here. Fingers crossed. Oh, I was on the SSH session. Whoops. Let me exit. So on our Ubuntu desktop, we're gonna do the same thing. what was it called? Oh, whoops. Syncthing. Cool. Should be installing any sec now. So if we go to our apps, there we go. This is what I was looking for earlier. There's a start Syncthing button. What's cool about Ubuntu is you have this startup application thing. So if you want to start Syncthing when you start your computer up, you just click add and it says add a startup program. We're going to name it Syncthing. The command to start is also called Syncthing. So what that does is when your computer boots up, these are the applications that automatically start. So one of them is going to be Syncthing. Cool. So we're going to start our Syncthing software now. Windows is already started. So normally if you don't have a server, what you would do is, oh, let me show you actually. So what I mean by the base Syncthing installation is it just installs the software. There's no GUI involved. And to access the GUI, you have to do it over the web. So we're going to do localhost, which is also 127.0.0.1 on port 8384. So with that, this is what it looks like. You configure and connect devices on Syncthing through a web GUI. So it's going to ask the same prompt. We're going to say no. So this is how Syncthing looks like. So we're going to add a remote device. I don't know the Windows. So what you do, you click this Actions button. You would show ID, and it's going to be PEL5. PEL5. So we're going to name it Windows 10. Takes a little time to kind of establish a connection, but by establishing a connection, what you're basically doing is that you're giving explicit permission to connect the two devices. So no one can just install Syncthing and automatically get connected to the network. What you have to do is establish a connection and confirm the connection to do that. It's taking a little long. Let's hope this works. There we go. Device Syncthing Ubuntu VMware at this code. Let's check P2ERC. So we checked our ID. Oh, it's called ID. Why did I say code? P2ERC. So yeah, we're good. So this is explicit permission that you want to establish a connection with our desktop, our Ubuntu desktop. We're going to click add. It automatically does it for us. And we're going to click save. So with that, we should be connected now. So on our Windows box, we're going to click edit to share the folder with Syncthing Ubuntu VMware, which is just our Ubuntu desktop. And by default, our directory, I believe, is in our user again. Oh, let me go back actually. So click this local disk, we go to users, my user, and we have a folder called sync. And the same goes with our Ubuntu desktop. Whoops, let me accept the connection. So I clicked share earlier. So this is asking, hey, do you want to share this folder? This folder wants to be shared to you. Do you want to share back? And if you click share, you establish a peer-to-peer connection with that device. What are they going to do? Oh, so if I go back to my home directory and I type in ls, there is a, oh dang it, hold on. Sharing your screen is tough. Okay, there's a folder called sync. So if we do cd sync, it should be empty. So what we're going to do, we're going to make a file to see if this works. We're going to do touch, which is the command to create a file. We're going to put hello from Ubuntu. I'm going to make it text. So with that, let's go to our Windows. Just wait a little. Boom. Hello from Ubuntu. So you can see, see ya, Dylan. We created the file and it's synced across these two devices. So that's basically how Syncthing works. Do you guys have any questions so far? I just want to stop right here. We, went over how to install Syncthing on both Windows and Linux. It does work on Mac, but I don't have any Mac devices at home, so I don't know how Mac works at all, the OS X, but it's cross-platform across those three main operating systems. But does anyone have any questions so far? Just wanted to stop here and ask. Alrighty, so the next thing we're gonna go over is two settings. So you have a lot of different tabs. The one we're gonna be focused on is GUI. So by default, it doesn't use HTTPS. So if you want to click it for our web GUI, you would check this and it will use HTTPS now. This is important because you want HTTPS, but you also want to have a login for the web GUI. So by default, if you go to this localhost :8384, which is the port, you're automatically into Syncthing. But Syncthing has an option to have authentication. I'm not going to be doing that today, but you enter a user password, and when you enter the web GUI, it's gonna ask for your login. You type in your username and password, and you're into the web GUI. The next thing I want to go over is connections, particularly these three things. You want to turn all of them off. You want to turn net traversal, global discovery, and relaying off because we are working with our local network. That means you don't want any, anything going out, any connection going outside to the internet because we are syncing devices locally. So uncheck these three things. And these devices, ignore devices and ignore folders tabs. If there was a prompt that asked, oh, hey, this device wants to connect, and you click no, it'll show up right here. And the same thing goes with ignore folders. If you have a folder you don't want to sync, you would just put this, you would ignore it, and it'll be right here. So with that, remember to turn these things off. They're, it's optional. Syncthing works without turning these things off, but you want to leave local discovery on because it'll just automatically connect, so you don't have to manually do anything. So I would leave this on. If you leave this off like I did on Tuesday, you're gonna be like, lost as to why Syncthing won't connect to any device. Keep this on, guys. Keep this on, or else it's gonna be embarrassing when Syncthing doesn't connect. So we're gonna click save. Next thing I want to go over for Syncthing is the folders. So if you click here and you click edit, these are the folder settings. So by default, the folder is called sync, right? You can label it. I'm not going to label it. This sharing tab shares it with the peers that you connect to. So optionally, if I don't want to share it with our Ubuntu desktop anymore, I would uncheck it. So we're going to do just that. I don't want to share it with it no more. Can I click remove? Oh no, never mind, don't do that. We're not going to share it with Ubuntu desktop no more, because we're going to run everything through our server now. file versioning. There are a few different types of file versioning. It creates a backup system for Syncthing, if you will. So these different versions of file versioning have different use cases. So if you want to keep your files backed up just in case anything happens, then you would enable these file versioning options, so that if you were to, let's say, the Ubuntu hello from Ubuntu gets deleted, instead of being deleted from the face of Earth, you would still have file versioning would keep it. So I'm going to be going over a few. So trash can versioning is a super basic it's a super basic way to kind of keep track of deleted files and whatnot. It's basically like a recycle bin. So clean out after what? How many days? So we're going to specify, let's say you want to clean out the trash can after 30 days. So if any changes were to happen to a file, it gets updated. So the old file would be put to the trash can. So it would be kept for 30 days. And that's basically trash can file versioning and cleanup interval. I guess this just like signifies that for how many minutes is that? 5? 6? Okay, I don't know my math, but for this amount of seconds, I guess it refreshes the trash can. The next is called simple. So this is different from our trash can because there's no like clean out, there's no trash can involved. What it does is it'll keep the specified number of versions that you want to keep if a file does get, changed or deleted in any way. And the last one I'm going to go over is staggered. Staggered is the same thing as simple file, but the difference is that you actually get to specify the path that you want to save it in. So files are moved from a date stamped version to a .st versions directory. So the dot is kind of hidden. So yeah, good to know. Versions are automatically deleted if they are older than the maximum age or exceed the number of files allowed interval. So it has different use cases. I'm not going to be going over external file versioning because it's way out of our scope for today, but we're going to, let's see, ignore patterns. So this option lets you kind of tell Syncthing, hey, don't look for this file, don't look for that file. And by using this, I guess it's called regex, regular expression patterns, you can kind of tell Syncthing to ignore certain things. For advanced, the one thing I want to go over is our folder types. So there are 3 folder types. One is called send and receive, the other is called send only and receive only. So depending on what folder type you pick, it kind of changes how Syncthing will work on your device. So we put send and receive. That means on this desktop you can send files and you can also receive files. And the same thing goes with send only. Send only, that means you can only send files. You can't receive anything. And for receive only, you only get to receive files coming your way, but you can't send anything. So different use cases, but for now we're going to keep it on send and receive to keep things simple, and that's how it's going to work with our file server. So with that, we kind of went through the settings of Syncthing overall and our folder settings. So we're going to click save. I'm actually just going to remove this. Remove. Yes, I don't want our devices to be connected to each other no more. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Let's see. I'm going to go to Windows 10. Okay, you see all this like random IPs? That is what happens when you don't turn off these things. So we're going to want to turn it off. It doesn't touch any public servers. Well, It does, but it doesn't like store any files like a normal cloud would. The only reason why these things are on is because if a device can't connect to another device when you're trying to connect it together to create a peer-to-peer network, it'll hit a server from the outside and try to connect to your device from the internet itself. So since we know that we have internet, we can just turn these things off. And now we have to restart. So we're still going to remove this. I don't want Windows. So to kind of show you why I don't want the devices communicating with each other, it's because Syncthing works through communications by a device. So when you have two computers, if you establish a connection, that's very easy. All you have to do is establish one connection and they're synced across two devices, whatever you do to it. But where that gets more complicated is, what if you have more than two? Oops. What if you had three? So it would take three connections to sync all of them. What if you had four? So on and so forth. As more devices get connected, you have to go into the device and connect them to each other, so that all devices are synced. That's how peer-to-peer networks work. Well, to fix that, that's why I wanted to show you guys about making a Syncthing server. So if we had just one device in the middle, which is going to be our server, our central location to sync files, all you have to do is connect it to the server. And by doing that, any change made here goes to the server, and the server will act like the central location to sync files here, here, and here. So instead of having like a cajillion connections to each other and to other devices, so it's like this, and then you also have like this and that, there's only one connection. One connection from each device to a server, and the server acts as the distributor to other devices. This makes things more cleaner, much easier, and it's more efficient. You don't have to manually go into different devices and connect them to each other. The server will act as the mediator. So let's go back to our slides. How much have I covered so far? Yes, perfect. So how are we going to connect our server? Oh, one thing I want to note. So we've been working on desktop environments. What is this? No. All right, let me show you the ignore folder actually. Yeah, see? So if you click no, it just shows up here. So one thing we've been doing is we've been working on desktop environments. So both Windows and on Ubuntu desktop, we are able to go to a browser. We are able to go browser and access a web GUI. It doesn't work like that for Syncthing. The Syncthing server, for Syncthing server, there is no web GUI. All you see is this, ugly, very, very ugly black screen. You can't, there's no like graphical interface that you can work with to connect to Syncthing. So that is where SSH tunneling comes into hand. So what is SSH tunneling? It basically allows you to forward traffic to another port. So let's just say this is our Syncthing server right here. Since it can't normally use a web GUI to kind of configure its settings, what you're doing is that you're tunneling all the traffic used to host to show the web GUI into a tunnel, and that tunnel will be at the end of the tunnel, it'll be another device. So that is very confusing to explain. So I'm going to go back to Paint one more time, and hopefully this kind of explains everything. So we have three devices on VMware right now. We have our server. Whoops. We have Windows, and we have Ubuntu. So all of these ports sorry, all of these devices are running Syncthing on its default port 8384. And if we, like I just showed you, on both Ubuntu desktop and Windows 10 desktop, you could access it. So let's just go back and show you. So, well, let me show you on Windows. You can actually access the same thing on the website. Localhost 8384. All right, we have our web GUI. So on both devices, you can access it through our web GUI on port 8384, like the address bar right here. The same thing can be said about our server. It also runs on 8384. But the thing is, we can't like show it on our server screen because there's no, that's how servers work. There's nothing graphical. You just see a black screen. It's just so ugly on server. That's why SSH is like the thing to do. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick one of the devices. I'm gonna pick Ubuntu for today. Let me use another color. Let me use green. So what you're saying for SSH tunneling is on another device, you're saying, let's see, let's say a random port. On a random port called 8888, it has to be a random open port, by the way. So on Ubuntu desktop, you're saying, hey, I am open on port 888. You're telling the server, hey, I'm open to port 888. And what it's doing is that on port 8888, you're telling the server, hey, on what is it called? On localhost 8384, which is basically this port. You're telling the server, hey, on 8384, tunnel this traffic to port 888 on our Ubuntu desktop. Is anyone confused by this so far? I know it's a very confusing concept, but what you're doing is you're telling another device you have an open port, and you're telling the remote device to tunnel that traffic on port 8384 to 8888 on Ubuntu desktop. It's a little technical, but I can try to break it down if you guys do have any questions. I'm gonna stop here because it's pretty. All right, if there's no questions, I'm gonna show you the command to do that. So it's a very long command, it's very confusing. I barely figured it out like 2 days ago, but we have SSH, the command. We're gonna use the flag tactl. See, different use cases, more functionality for the SSH command. So we're gonna do SSH tactl, the listening port. So the listening port is 8888, like I said. So you're doing this command on another device that is going to be tunneling the connection to. So this is on our Ubuntu's desktop side. So we do port 8888, remote IP address, and remote port. This is the server. So remote IP address and remote port. You put localhost here and 8384 here because that is what Syncthing is running on. It's running on localhost. So you can put 127.0.0.1, but it's the same thing. Localhost is easier to type. Since the remote port that's not being accessible on the server is 8384, that is what you would put here. And the next input would be the remote user at the remote IP. So this is what the command looks like overall. So you're telling Ubuntu desktop, hey, I'm on port 8888. Please tunnel this connection on port 8384 on localhost of 192.168.10.4 to Ubuntu desktop. So let's do this. This is actually pretty mind-blowing when I got it to work. So we are going to go back to the terminal. See, am I on server here? Okay, let's close this connection. We're going to clear the screen and we're going to do SSH TAC L. We're going to do port 8888. We're going to do colon. We're going to do local host. What was it? 83? 83, 84. Yeah, 83, 84. And these are the credentials for the remote device. We're going to do 192.168. 10? 10? Yeah, 10. What was it? 4. Okay. So if you see this input after you type in the command, that means it works. So port 8888, we are going to be doing that. We're going to do local host. I believe so. Since since we turn on public key authentication, this should be establishing. Oh, I should have said that first. This works over an SSH connection. So you put the credentials here, and what you're doing is you're establishing a SSH connection. But the thing is, you don't have SSH is not just for inputting remote commands. You can tunnel traffic. This is crazy. So yeah, I believe I am using the SSH key for this, since I've already turned on. Yeah, we're gonna transfer files now. So we're gonna do localhost colon 8888. And if I click enter, oh dang it. No. All right, let's see. What is the issue? Why isn't that working? Sudo. Let's do a little troubleshooting. Status. Nope. Oh, did I forget to turn on the? Oh. Whoops. Do I have the user? Syncthing user. I might have skipped some steps. Oh. Okay, I know the issue. So we're gonna create a user. I think I might have skipped a step earlier. So let me just show you what I kind of forgot. So this. Sorry. All right, it's this one. So I believe I forgot to do this thing right here. So what we're doing is we're adding a user called Syncthing on the server. Why, you may ask? Because on our server, the default user has pseudo privileges. You don't want Syncthing to be running on a server as the same user as a root user. So by making a user called a random user with normal privileges, if anything were to happen to Syncthing, the threat wouldn't also have access to a pseudo account either. So this is just to add to our layered security. So on our server, we're going to do sudo add user Syncthing. Wait. Oh. So it's gonna ask for the input for new password. I'm gonna put the password, retype the password. So it's gonna ask for all this information. You just click enter and skip. So we've done that. The next command we want to do is called sudo enable syncthing at syncthing.service. Is that the right command? Yeah. Why isn't that autofilling? Oh well. We're gonna enable this. Oh whoops, I forgot a whole word. we're going to do sudo systemctl enable syncthing at syncthing.service. So let's check on that. We're going to check on that using the systemctl status. So we're checking, what we're doing right now is we're checking the status of Syncthing. So as you can see right here, it says inactive and in parentheses dead. The reason why that is because sudo systemctl enable doesn't actually start our service. What enable is doing is that it's telling the Linux server, hey, on boot up, start Syncthing. But since we haven't booted up and the system's still on, it's not gonna auto turn on yet. We're still on the same session. So to fix that, we're gonna use another systemctl command called start the service Syncthing on the Syncthing user. So if we enter and we do status one more time, now it's active. Let's see if this works though. So we're gonna run the same command. All right, localhost. Yes. Okay. It worked. Okay. This is crazy right now. So this is gonna be the same prompt as earlier, but now we are on the server's GUI. We're on the server's GUI on our Ubuntu desktop. So it's going to ask us the same prompt, allow anonymous usage reporting. Click no. So you can see here, Syncthing server-VMware. This is Syncthing Ubuntu-VMware. And this is Syncthing Windows-VMware. So I'm going to turn off those settings that we talked about earlier. Oh, it's already off. Oh, wait, I'm on the wrong one. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. We're going to go to connections. We're not touching anything outside of our service. Our local network. And what we're going to do is we're going to add our devices now. So for Ubuntu, you would check the ID P2ERC. P2ERC. We're going to call it Ubuntu desktop. And this also works the other way around. So if you wanted to add the server instead of the device, you would just show the ID of the server, CV and CV na. So let's just do that actually, server. So you are saying, hey, server, please connect with me. And if you wait a little, it should prompt for a connection from our Ubuntu desktop. See, 8384 port 8888. And the reason why we do this SSH tunneling to connect to our server web GUI is because we've already established public key authentication. So that means on both Windows and Ubuntu, if you wanted to configure the server settings, you would do so via SSH tunneling, via SSH tunnel, instead of making Syncthing open to the entire network. This is more secure because we've already established who can connect to our server, so those connections can pop up our web GUI instead of opening it up to the network, to the local network. So Syncthing Ubuntu VMware. So we're going to click add device. So it'll automatically fill this information in. We click save. And the same goes for Windows. We're going to do add remote CV na and type in server. Let's go back. Okay, so I saw this issue earlier. I am not sure why this pops up, and I'm pretty much guessing that since we are not installing Syncthing from Syncthing's own repository, and this is what I mean. So on Ubuntu's side, we don't really have the latest version of Ubuntu, of Syncthing, because you gotta add this source for Syncthing, which this is basically saying this is Syncthing's very own Play Store. I'm gonna add it to our Ubuntu desktop's sources list, and we're gonna install the latest version of Syncthing directly from Syncthing itself. You could do this if you want to, but I rather just install it through Ubuntu's package manager. Oh, okay, so desktop 3Q63. This is our Windows desktop right here. See, desktop 3Q63. So we want to add this device. Save it. So if you face this, it's just saying like, since you installed it from the package manager of Ubuntu, it's just telling you to upgrade. It's not a big deal, so we're just gonna click OK for that. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna edit this, and we're gonna share it to both the Windows desktop and Ubuntu desktop. So by doing this, we're kind of doing what I just drew earlier. So we have the Ubuntu server in the middle, and we have Windows. Let me just write this down so it's not confusing. Server, Windows, and Ubuntu. So instead of directly connecting it to each other, even though it's only two devices, the server acts as a central location to sync through all devices. So let's test this out. Oh, okay, so on Windows, server wants to share this folder with you. You would click accept. On Syncthing, let's see if this works. Right here, server wants to share the same folder. So let's test this out. Okay, we already made a file on Ubuntu actually, so we're gonna make a file on Windows. We're gonna name it Hello from Windows. From Windows. Server disconnected. Oh no. What's the issue? Oh, okay. I don't think anything was wrong. Whoops. Dang it. All right, so we created the file called Hello from Windows. So let's see. So when we ls'd our sync folder, it only had a hello from Ubuntu. So let's ls it again. Boom, it's synced. See, hello from Windows. So let's try to see if this works on Ubuntu side. Actually, we don't need sudo. We're gonna just do nano, our text editor, hello from Windows.text, and we're gonna put hi Ubuntu. So we're going to click Control X again, Y to save, enter. So we wait a little bit. It should sync up. So we see that it's an empty file for 0 kilobytes. Oh, it just turned to 1. So if we click on this, hi Ubuntu. So we basically achieved a Syncthing file server just right now. One thing I want to point out that's super interesting is this. You can also do the same thing from our server itself, though the server acts as a mediator, so this is not realistic. You don't really want to share files from the server itself. It's kind of acting as the middleman. There it is. cd sync. Oh wait, sorry. It is on our Syncthing user. So to switch to that user, we do su to change users, and we're gonna switch to our Syncthing user. And it's gonna prompt for a password. There it is. So we do ls. There's a sync folder. We're gonna sync into that. And if we list the directory, we have the same files So I'm gonna make another file called, no, I'm just gonna use touch hello from server.txt. So if we make that, we have it on our server side now. So let's see if this works. Actually, I can just check here. So if I see here, it says hello from Ubuntu, hello from Windows. Earlier it was just Ubuntu. If we type in ls on the same directory again, we have hello from server. So the cool thing about this, when I was trying to make this work, is if you just close the connection on the server side, the SSH tunnel side, by clicking exit. Oh, so that first exit was to exit the Syncthing user. So we're now back to our regular user. So we exit our SSH connection here, and we just are back to our regular user. The tunnel closed. You see on port 8888, there's no more traffic. You're not tunneling traffic from our server's port 8384 anymore because you closed the SSH connection. But what's really cool about this is I've connected our devices to the server. So they don't know that the other device exists. So on Windows, you don't see Ubuntu, and you know this by our remote devices. The only device that it's connected to is the server, and the same thing can be said about on Ubuntu desktop. It's connected to the server. But even though we close the connection for the server side, I'm going to go to our sync folder by changing directories into it. The same files are here, and we're going to create another one. We're going to do just some random folder. Actually, just do does this work.txt. So on our Ubuntu side, we created a file called does this work.txt. So let's see if this actually works on our Windows side, because we have to, oh, there it is. Does this work? Yes. Save. So even though there is no SSH tunnel connection onto the Ubuntu server side, the file server still works. The only reason why we made a SSH tunnel in the first place was to configure the server side of the settings for Syncthing. So once the settings has been established, you can close the connection and it still works because Syncthing will be on as long as the server's on, and as long as you enable the service, you really don't have to touch the server unless you have any configurations additional configurations that you have to make. So we have created a Syncthing file server. Pretty cool. All right, so we finished the SSH tunneling. That was a big thing. I just wanted to stop over here really quickly. Does anyone have any questions on what I've did so far? I know that was a lot to take in.
You're muted.
Hey, Robinson, you're muted.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Let me go back. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, let me just start over. I just talked to myself for like 2 minutes. So we finished the SSH tunnel. We are gonna go to firewalls now. So the reason why I wanted to go over firewalls is because when you are working with a server, it will typically have a firewall on because you don't want anything to just, talk to the server if it wants to. You want it to be secure. So there's layers of security we're doing here. Defense in depth, like the workshop by Taylor, I believe. Yeah, Taylor. So we have public key authentication on. We have, explicitly sharing our devices with each other. The last thing we're going to do is turn on firewalls. So we do that by UFW. UFW is an easier way to kind of configure a firewall versus IP tables. I've seen IP tables used before, but it's kind of complicated, the syntax. UFW is really easy. Yeah, so basically a firewall it's just monitoring incoming and outgoing traffic. Yes, IP table sucks. So it's monitoring incoming and outgoing traffic, and you are the one establishing the rules on what type of connections it allows or what kind of connections it would block. You define what it is. So what we're going to do is we're only going to have one rule. We're going to have one rule for just this workshop. If realistically there's like way more rules and a lot of like, it's just way more secure, but since the server is only using an SSH connection, we're just gonna do one rule today, just one. So the rule we're gonna do is allow 22, which is just saying, hey, allow the SSH connection in. I'm gonna be going over this on the terminal, so let's go over this. So actually, this is ugly. Let me see if I'm still connected. No, I'm not. I'm just gonna SSH into it again. So I'm gonna go SSH into our server. What was it? 10.4? Okay. So I think by default UFW is installed. Let's just check this. If it's not, you would do sudo apt install UFW, which is just saying, hey, Ubuntu Play Store, please install this app for me. Okay, we already have it. So the first command we're going to do is sudo what was it again? Sudo UFW enable. Oh, let's see if this. Okay, so yeah, it's good. Sorry, this like share screen bar, every time I go near it, it pops up and I can't see the bottom of my screen. So it's enabled. So let's do sudo UFW status. So it's active now. Another command we can do is do status verbose. And what verbose does is it gives us more detail. So if we have if we show verbose, the two things I want to point out is a deny incoming and allow outgoing. So what this is this establishes the baseline of our firewall. Any incoming connections, it'll automatically deny, and any outgoing connections from our server itself, it's going to allow. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to try to SSH in from our server. Will this work? Oh yeah, so by SSH, by running the same command, earlier it said permission denied public key, because this by regularly SSHing into our server, if we don't have a public key on the server itself, it's going to say, hey, you don't have a public key, you can't SSH in. But this time, it's hanging. See, connection timeout. When you do SSH, it's not showing this prompt that says permission denied public key. What's actually happening is this deny rule, this deny incoming rule. Any connections incoming to our server itself, it's going to reject. So that means nothing can touch our servers in terms of any incoming connections. So that's why it's hanging. You can't SSH into it anymore because it's just blocking all connections. So that is why I want to allow just one rule. So we're going to do sudo ufw allow 22. So port 22 is what SSH runs on. You can type in SSH, but 22, let's see, sudo allow 22, rule added. So if we check it again, ufw, let's see, wait, yeah, okay, let's just go with what we're going with right now, verbose. So it's still the baseline, but we've added one rule on top of it, which is allow SSH. So if we go to our Windows box and regularly SSH into it, we're going to get back the public key denial. So that means our firewall, our server on the firewall side, it's allowing one connection, which is SSH. So if anyone were to connect to SSH, they would have to go through the public key authentication again, instead of being totally blocked and nothing can connect into it. So with that said, we have worked with UFW. Pretty cool stuff. This is important. I only did one rule today, but there's definitely way more you can do with UFW. And it is important when you're working on the server side that you have strong firewall rules so that you don't have any malicious traffic going into the server itself. So with that said, I have a workshop feedback form. This is entirely optional, but for those of you who want to fill it out, I would appreciate if you do, because it lets me know what I should work on, what I did good, what I did bad, so that next time if I do have a workshop, I can improve myself. So definitely send that in if you're willing to. It's again entirely optional. But moving on, we have finished our workshop for the day. We finished just a little early, but I kind of just want to review what we've done so far, what we've accomplished. The first thing we did was we learned about type 1 and type 2 hypervisors. So a type 1 hypervisor would be Proxmox CXI. Type 2, which I used today, was VMware, and another one would be VirtualBox. The next is networking on our virtual machine side, virtual networking. So we learned about bridge networks, we learned about NAT networks, and we learned about host-only networks. One thing I want to just reiterate again, since we finished our file server, you could put this on a bridge network. That is what I'm going to do. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want all devices on my actual network to be synced. So it definitely works on a bridge network, and you know, if you get comfortable with it working on a virtual machine under like another IP on NAT network, get comfortable with it. And if you are, Robinson security block coming soon, guys. I'll plug it. It's coming real soon. So what was I saying? Get comfortable with it on the virtual machine on the NAT network side before you put it on the bridge network, because again, earlier I said you don't want to put anything on the bridge network where your actual devices are using internet from. You want to make sure you know what you're doing so that nothing happens on your local area network. The next thing we did was which was important is SSH. We learned how to generate the key pair, how to transfer it, how to actually SSH. We locked down our SSH service by only allowing public key authentication and a few other settings. And a super difficult topic, in my opinion, SSH tunneling. SSH is a big thing in terms of security, because if you're working with servers, you are most likely not going to have a server like today on the accessible to yourself. So SSH, if anything, take this away. SSH is important, and I hope I covered all my bases with SSH. And the last thing we did was set up a file server. No, not the last thing. The second to last thing, we set up a file server. So this is like amazing, because you don't have to physically connect any random devices. Like if you have more than 2 devices, it gets really difficult. So you don't have to manually connect a bunch of devices anymore. You have based on the client server model on Tuesday, you have a central location where Syncthing will be syncing all files across your network. This is going to be super convenient for me, because I have just one particularly sensitive file, my password manager file. I don't want that to touch the public cloud if I don't have to anymore. So I'm going to be using Syncthing to sync my password manager database over my local network, so that all devices have the same file, and I don't have to manually, send it to a device, or like use USB, or like connect my phone to the computer and transfer the file there. None of that. Everything is synced across all devices that are established in a peer-to-peer network. The last thing we did was UFW. We created one firewall rule. You can definitely add way more, but just for today, I just had one firewall rule. So SSH and UFW are pretty important concepts to learn. I hope you guys, definitely dive into this topic more than what I've done so far for UFW. But with that, we are done with my workshop. I hope you guys liked it. I put a lot of work into it. And yeah, thank you for coming, guys. Okay, I'm gonna be stopping the recordings now. So if you guys have any questions, please